pink, kind of a light red. And I thought, well, that's unusual. I wonder if this is one of those fancy synthetic oils. And I thought, I don't know. And I'm watching this pink stuff continue to drain out, and I began thinking, I thought, even the synthetic oils are brown in color. Oil is brown. Transmission fluid, though, that's pink. Yeah, I wasn't draining her oil, but I was very successful in draining her transmission. And as soon as I have done this and recognized it, I'm just furious with myself. I just wanted to kick myself. I thought, Michael, you goon, how did you wind up draining all of her transmission fluid out? You could have done better. You should have known better. If you had a question, look at it a little bit longer. Pay attention to what's above your head. Or if you've got a question, go get the manual out and you'll be able to figure this out. And so here I am watching this transmission fluid drain out, just disgusted with myself, having one of those I can't believe I did that moments. Now, we've all had those types of moments, haven't we? For each of us throughout the course of our lives on multiplied different occasions, sometimes really consequential, sometimes more insignificant. We've had those moments. Sometimes it may be that you've made a big purchase and afterwards you're like, what was I thinking? How did I wind up doing that or signing that contract? Maybe it was something that you said to someone. You're like, how in the world did that come out of my mouth? I can't believe that I did that. Why did I do that? But we have all of these I can't believe I did that moments, financially, relationally, economically, all these different ways. But I want you to understand that as a follower of Christ, on the spiritual level, unfortunately, all too often we have those moments as well, don't we? I mean, you understand that God has given and established for us some parameters in life that He wants us to operate within. And repeatedly, we've had instances in our life, my life, your life, where we know that God has said, do not do this, and then we do it, and then afterwards we're like, I can't believe I did that. And we're left with a couple of questions. How did I wind up doing that? And then secondly, how can I keep from doing that again? How can I prevent having those I can't believe I did that type of moments? Well, hopefully we're going to see the answer to that today as we're continuing to walk through the life of Joseph in a series that I've called Better You Than Me. And the premise of this series is pretty simple, and that is this. As a believer, as somebody that's seeking to follow Christ, in terms of living, you've really got two options. You can just live through a process of trial and error and make a whole lot of mistakes that may cost you significantly, but just kind of figure it out on your own. Or you can pay attention to the examples that God has provided and afforded us in His Word of individuals who got it right and sometimes they get it wrong, and we can see their mistakes, how costly those mistakes are, and we can learn from them so that we can say of them, better you than me. You paid the price, and instead of learning through the school of hard knocks, I'm going to pay attention to your example and sometimes follow it and other times not. And this morning, we're going to see an episode in the life of Joseph where some individuals are going to make a decision and a choice that in the years to come, they're going to be kicking themselves saying, I can't believe I did that. And from their experience, we can learn how it is that you and I can prevent those same types of moments, those same types of, I can't believe I did that moments. How can we prevent it? Look with me in your Bibles today to Genesis 37. Genesis chapter 37, and we'll pick up this morning with verse 12. Genesis 37, beginning with verse 12. Genesis 37, verse 12, we're told, then that's Joseph's brothers, went to feed their father's flock in Shechem. Jacob said to Joseph, are not your brothers feeding the flock in Shechem? Come, I will send you to them. So he said, here I am. And he said to him, please go and see if it is well with your brothers and well with the flocks, and bring back word to me. So he sent him out of the valley of Hebron, and he went to Shechem. Now a certain man found him, and there he was wandering in the field, and the man asked him, saying, what are you seeking? And Joseph said, I'm seeking my brothers. Please tell me where they are feeding their flocks. And the man said, they have departed from here. I heard them say, let us go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan. But when they saw him afar off, even before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. Now, we're going to pick up the rest of the story here as the message unfolds, but we've got enough to set the stage. But again, our question is this: how is it that you and I, as followers of God, can prevent those "I can't believe I did that" moments? How can we prevent that? Well, the first thing that you need to do is this: do not relish isolation. Do not relish isolation. When we last left Joseph, you remember that it was very clear, not simply to Joseph, but to all of his brothers, that he was Daddy's favorite. Jacob demonstrated favoritism towards Joseph to a degree that was unmistakable, not simply with his verbal doting, but even intangible gifts. He showed how Joseph was the favorite. And you remember one of the things that he gave to him was this cloak of many colors. Would have been enormously expensive. And he gives this as a gift to Joseph, but he doesn't do anything of the sort for Joseph's brothers. And so Joseph is walking around with this priceless, expensive gift. His brothers are constantly hearing about how wonderful he is, and why can't you be like Joseph? And everybody knows he is the favorite. And the brothers come to resent him. And the resentment really crosses the line from even resentment and jealousy to genuine hatred. To complicate matters, one of the things that we looked at last week is that God begins to give Joseph some dreams. And in two different dreams, he has this vision where through symbols, his brothers and his father wound up bowing down to him. He shares this with his brothers and with his father, and you can imagine how that went over. Oh, yeah, like somehow, anyway, we're going to be bowing down before you. Not now, not then, not ever. We hate you. All right, so we have all of that as backdrop, and we come to verse 12. And we're told that Joseph's brothers go to feed their father's flock in Shechem. Now, where they lived, home for them was in the town of Hebron. Shechem was 60 miles away. One of the things that we need to do as students of the Scripture is to pay attention to everything that's said, because sometimes in what appear to be insignificant details, there are things of significance that we ought to pay attention to. And relative to this, I believe if we're paying attention, we ought to ask a question. Why go 60 miles away to take sheep out to graze? I mean, 60 miles is a long walk, isn't it? And it's a distance that would have taken who knows how many days to make. Because it's one thing to walk 60 miles. That would take you, I mean, if you're able just to concentrate on walking and doing so as quickly as you can, it's going to take a lengthy period of time to walk that distance. But then if you're trying to take sheep and keep them corralled, and it's going to be a much longer distance. And so they have gone that far, 60 miles away from home. Well, while they are out, they've told Jacob, hey, we're going to go feed the animals. We're going to take them to graze in Shechem. That's where we are going to be. We're told in verse 14 that Jacob asks Joseph to do something. He says, how about going and checking up on your brothers, making sure that everything is okay? It's probably been maybe a period of weeks since they left, and he wants Joseph to go make sure that everything is okay. Joseph goes to Shechem, 60 miles. So he walks that distance. And then once he gets there, he's walking around. He's looking for his brothers, but he can't find them. And thankfully, there was a resident there who said, hey, can I help you with something? Are you looking? What do you need? And Joseph said, hey, I'm looking for my brothers. They should have been here grazing with the animals. Have you seen them? Oh, yeah, they were here, but they've gone to Dothan, which is another 13 miles further. 73 miles now they have traveled from home. We're left with this question if we're paying attention. Why travel 73 miles to take your sheep to graze? I mean, that would be like you living in Greensboro and walking all the way to Concord for your animals to graze. I mean, that's a long way. Why do that? Certainly within 73 miles, there's someplace far closer to home where you're able to find good pasture land. Why go that distance? I believe that the context of this chapter gives us the answer to that. When we're first introduced to Joseph back in verse 2, do you remember what we're told about him? We're told how he had gone out to check on his brothers, and he brings back to Jacob a bad report. So what happens, and Joseph's MO is this. He goes to pay attention to what the brothers are doing, and if they're doing anything that they shouldn't, well, he's going to rat them out. Joseph is a tattletale. Why do you think they have traveled not simply 60 miles, but then traveled an additional 13 miles to take the animals grazing? Well, they want to get, first of all, as far away from Jacob as they possibly can, but even more, they want to be out of Joseph's sight. Because it seems, in all likelihood, that the brothers were probably engaged in some things that Daddy wouldn't have approved of. Maybe it was how they were interacting and involving themselves with the locals, but it seems that they were doing something that they did not want known. After all, they've told their father, hey, we'll be in this town, but that's not where they actually go. They go another 13 miles. Why have they done this? Well, because I believe that they wanted to get out of Daddy's, out of Joseph's sight, so that then they could do what and when they pleased. Now, in terms of application, I believe this teaches us or reminds us of an important lesson. Let me first say this. I understand and I get the fact that every single one of us needs some alone time. I need it, you need it, we all need it. Jesus himself even sought some time to just get away from every and anything else. You know, sometimes we need that just to be able to clear our minds, to be able to concentrate on something that needs our attention, or just to get a break from the demands and the responsibilities of everybody and everything else. We need that sometimes. Though I understand, get, and appreciate that fact, we must experience isolation with the greatest care and, quite frankly, the greatest moderation. The reason I say that is this. Where isolation is present, accountability and oversight are absent. Where isolation is present, accountability and oversight are absent. We're getting ready to see, and the stage is getting set for Joseph's brothers to do a terrible thing to him. They're getting ready to betray their brother in ways that are almost unthinkable to us. They're getting ready to do something that in the years to come, they're going to be kicking themselves saying, how in the world did I do that? Why in the world did I do that? And one of the reasons they did so is because they pursued and sought out isolation. They sought to get to a point, get to a place in a circumstance where oversight and accountability were gone. A week ago, this past Thursday night, I had gone, after the kids went to bed, to Krispy Kreme to get some donuts for breakfast the next morning. I bought a dozen chocolate ice custard filled, and I had a coupon for a free dozen glazed. I get those home on Thursday night. We all get up on Friday morning, and we have donuts for breakfast. After breakfast, the kids have gone into the den. They're watching TV for a few minutes. Caroline has gone in the bedroom. She's getting ready. I go in there, and I'm talking to her for just a few minutes. And then I come back out into the kitchen. Once I get to the kitchen, I notice beside the trash can on the floor is one glazed donut with a bite out of it. As I reach down to pick it up, Andrew comes from the sunroom carrying a donut saying, Daddy, why was this donut with a bite out of it on the floor? A little puzzled at this point. About that time, I opened the trash can to put these two donuts in there. And in the top of the trash can, I see two chocolate ice custard-filled donuts where the chocolate has been licked off and the custard has been sucked out. About that time, Catherine walks in, and her face is so chocolate-covered, she looks like Blackbeard. How did this happen? Why did this happen? Because we let a 3-year-old roam around the house without accountability and oversight. She was able to do that because we weren't there to see it. We weren't there to stop it. I hope you understand that this is not something that is peculiar or particular to just 3-year-olds. Think this past week, this past month, the previous 6 months. Think about particular sins that you have committed. Boundaries that God established, and you decided, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do what I want to do. Think about all of those ways in which you've disobeyed God, but then ask yourself this question. How many of those things would I have done? How many of those places would I have gone? How many of those things would I have watched? How many of those things would I have said if someone was there with me, particularly someone who had a committed walk with the Lord? Understand that each of us has people in our lives. For some, it's a spouse, it can be a child, it can be a coworker, it can be a dear friend who operates in our lives as someone that helps keep our feet to the fire and our lives on track. These are our people who, when we're starting to skirt the boundaries, they begin to sound the warning and say, hey, you ought not do that. You better rethink that. You better take a time out and reflect on that. Or if we cross the line, they're the ones that say, listen, you ought not be doing that. You need to change course. We have these people in our lives, and we need to understand that they are blessings from God in our lives to help keep us on the right path and on the right road. And understand this, these are individuals that we ought not seek to run from, rather we ought to seek to run with them. Because if we do not, if we relish isolation, if we relish getting off and away from anyone and anybody that will pay attention to what we're doing, providing oversight and accountability, we're going to find ourselves, you will find yourselves making decisions and choices and committing actions, deeds, and saying words that later you will come to regret in monumental ways. You'll be saying, how in the world did I do that? Why in the world did I do that? And the answer may very well be because you relished and sought out isolation. You want to prevent those moments? Don't relish isolation. But on the flip side, there's something else that you need to do, and that's to understand the danger of groups. Understand the danger of groups. And essentially what I want you to understand is that we need to experience balance. We shouldn't always pursue to be all by ourselves in isolation, but by the same token, there's not always safety in numbers either. You need to understand the danger of groups. At this point in the passage, Joseph has gone to Shechem. He's found out that the brothers are not there. Instead, they've gone an additional 13 miles to Dothan. He starts making that trek. And as he is approaching where the brothers are, he can't see them in all likelihood, but they can see him. It seems in all likelihood they're probably from an elevated perch, and they're able to see, we're told, in verse 18, they saw him afar off, way in the distance. Let me ask you this. How do you think they could tell it was Joseph? It was that coat. That coat. They saw that thing. They'd recognize it a mile away, and maybe even a mile away. They saw him. Like, there he comes. Verse 19, it says, they said to one another, look, the dreamer is coming. In fact, the most accurate translation of what they say is this. Here comes the dream expert. Now you can imagine the contempt and the ire that accompanied those words. But then you see there's a dramatic change to verse 20. They say, come therefore let us now kill him, cast him into some pit, and say some wild beast has devoured him. We shall see then what will become of his dreams. Pretty big change. They say, there's the dream expert. Hey, let's kill him, throw him in a pit, tell Daddy that wild dogs ate him. Now, though I believe all of these things happen, I don't believe recorded for us is the entirety of the conversation. And I think if we just think about this scenario, we can imagine how this unfolded. Someone is the first to see and says, surely not. Now, I'd recognize that coat anywhere. Guys, Joseph is headed our way. Here comes the dream expert. Blame coat. I hate that coat. You know what? But I hate him even more. Yeah, I can't stand him either. I am so sick and tired of Daddy's favoritism toward him. I'm tired of him wearing that coat, and it's just rubbing all of this in our faces. I hate this. I hate him. This old dream nonsense, like we're going to bow down before him one day. I wish there was some way we could be done with him. I wish there was some way we could live life without him. You know, we could kill him. Seriously? Yeah, you know we could. I mean, there's nobody out here. I mean, nobody would be the wiser. We could kill him. We could throw him into a hole. Nobody's going to find him. Word's not going to get back to Daddy. And we'll just tell him, yeah, wild animals somehow got him. I don't know what happened. So sad. And if we do that, we'll be rid of him, and no one will be the wiser. Now, with the exception, and what we'll see in the verses that follow, with the exception of Reuben, all of the brothers are unanimous in their desire to kill Joseph. Now, this is a weighty thing. This is not just anybody. This is not a random stranger. This is their brother, their own flesh and blood, and they're actively plotting to take his life, developing a plan of how they can do this and cover up their tracks. How did they get to this point? How did conversation arrive at that type of destination? Well, I could be wrong about this, but I really believe that I'm right. I believe if you were to poll individually all of the brothers and ask them this question, would you kill Joseph? I don't think any of them would have said yes. I think they would have said, I hate him. I hate being under the same roof with him. I'd like never to see him again, but actively, actually killing him, no, I don't think I could do that. I really believe with all of my heart that none of them individually would have said that. But how did they arrive collectively at this point? Because groups can be dangerous. There are things that groups are willing to do that individuals on their own never would. You say, well, Michael, that was back then. That was way back in Jacob's day and Joseph's day. Surely that type of thing wouldn't and does not happen now. Oh, really? Remember a number of weeks ago, if you were watching the news, and it was on the news consistently for weeks, what was going on in Ferguson, Missouri? Perhaps in particular, you were watching the night on the news as the grand jury that was responsible for investigating an officer's shooting of Michael Brown, the grand jury comes back with no indictment. All right, so the press conference takes place, and they're already out in the town square. There's at least multiplied hundreds of people. And as soon as that news is announced, there's a fair amount of unrest, and people are angry about this, and some are having signs and hollering and that type of thing. But that was about the extent of it at that point. But then as the minutes begin to pass, this group begins to swell, so that you've probably got several thousand people that, at least at this point, things are going okay. There's tons of police, tons of protesters, but the group is beginning to spread out, and they're going down various streets there in Ferguson. And as you're watching the news, you're seeing all this happening live, and all of a sudden somebody takes a rock or a brick, and in anger they throw it through a store window. Somebody else sees that, and they do the same. And all of a sudden you've got multiplied businesses that have no protection of their goods. Things are wide open. And all of a sudden, one person goes in, grabs a handful of stuff, and comes out. And then another, and then another, and then another. And then all of a sudden, you've got mobs of people going into businesses and looting and stealing all sorts of merchandise. I recognize anytime you get a massive group of people together, there's going to be bad apples. That's true anywhere in the world. There's going to be some bad eggs, and you get a big enough batch. That being said, I really believe sincerely that if you polled individual people, those that were taking items from these stores, I really believe if you were to ask them before that night began, hey, listen, do you think you would ever go into a store and walk out with a ton of stuff that doesn't belong to you? I think consistently what you'd have heard is, no, I wouldn't do that. I don't steal. I can't imagine myself in a million years looting, going in and grabbing handfuls of merchandise. I just don't think that would happen. But it did happen. Why? Because of the nature of people. And that is that we are willing to do things in groups that we would never do as individuals. And oftentimes it starts with one suggestion or one perpetrator, or it starts with somebody crossing the line, and then all of a sudden, it's like it cracks the seal and multiplied people, and then en masse the group begins to do this. I really think all of this started with one suggestion among Joseph's brothers. The conversation started with expressions of resentment and frustration, but then it grew and grew to the point that they are planning murder of their own brother. How did that happen? Because of this fact. groups are willing to do what individuals oftentimes will not. And if you want to prevent moments where you look back later and say, you know what, I cannot believe that I did that, then you and I absolutely must pay attention and understand the danger of groups. In terms of application for us, it reminds us of the fact that we had better watch out with who it is that we run with. In all likelihood, there are some relationships that you have with some people that put you into some groups that as a follower of Christ, maybe you don't have any business being a part of that particular group. You'd better watch out because we affect each other. People affect you. They have influence on you. And you'd better watch out because there are people, and it's true of all of us, that we can become part of groups, whereas a group, we're willing to do what we would never do as individuals. And if you want to avoid those and prevent those, I can't believe I did that moments, well, you've got to understand the danger of groups. There's a final thing that you and I must do, and that's this: forego the ranking of sin. Forego the ranking of sin. All right, so the brothers are planning to kill Joseph. He's still approaching them. In verse 21, we're told that Reuben, one of the brothers, heard this. And he said, let us not kill him. In fact, Reuben said, shed no blood, rather cast him into this pit which is in the wilderness. Do not lay a hand on him. In fact, the verse tells us what Reuben's plan was, that he might deliver him out of their hands and bring him back to his father. So Reuben hears all this and recognizes, hey, this is a bad idea. We're getting ready to cross a terrible line. We shouldn't do this. If I can just get them to throw him into the pit without killing him, when they go away, I can get him out, we'll get him back home safe, and everything will be back to normal. That was the plan. And at first it seems like it works. Joseph shows up, they yank the coat off of him, and they throw him into this pit. It was an old water cistern that was empty, and it would have been too deep to get out on your own without any type of help or assistance. And so there Joseph is. In the verses that follow, in verse 24, it says they cast him into the pit. Verse 25, they sat down to eat a meal. All right, so Joseph's over in the hole. He's probably calling out, asking for help, saying, guys, please don't do this. But they're sitting over there having Vienna sausages and potted meat, right? As they're eating, it says they lifted their eyes and looked, and there was a company of Ishmaelites. These are people from Midian. They're with their camels, bearing spices, balm, and myrrh on their way to carry them down to Egypt. So these are traders. Now, at this point, while they're eating, with the exception of Reuben, they're still intent on killing their brother. In verse 26, Judah suggests something, and he says this in the form of a question. What profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? I mean, guys, I get the fact if we kill Joseph, then we're through with him, but we don't get anything out of that. We got these traders, these merchants headed to Egypt. Come, let us sell him to them, and let not our hand be upon him, for he's our brother and our flesh. Now, guys, I hate to remind you, he is, after all, our brother. He's our own flesh and blood. If we kill him, that's bad news. We ought not be doing that. We'd be shedding innocent blood. Let's sell him to these traders, and then it's a win-win. We get rid of Joseph. We don't have innocent blood on our hands. We're not guilty of murder. And Joseph's gone. Life is good. Now, do you see what they're doing? How in the world do they get to the point in the place where for 20 pieces of silver they wind up selling their brother? He's going to be a slave now in Egypt. How does that wind up happening? Because they're operating under a rationale that so many times you and I operate under. And that's this. Murder is really, 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 really bad. So let's not do that, and instead we'll just sell him as a slave. And compared to, this isn't good, but compared to that, this is really good. This is really good. They wind up selling their own brother as a slave because they're doing what? They're ranking sin. Murder is really bad. Selling your brother as a slave, much better. Much better. And they wind up doing something that in the years to come they're going to regret with enormous magnitude. They're going to be kicking themselves thinking, how in the world did I do that? And how they wound up doing this is because they were engaged in something that so many times we do, which is to rank sin. What I want you to understand and get is that in God's eyes, there is no gradation of sin. God doesn't rank them. Now, I get and understand by the same token that God has made plain and clear that there are some sins that have far greater consequences and some sins that will, especially in this life, result in greater judgment. But when push comes to shove, God views every sin as an act of disobedience to Him. A lie, a murder, adultery, theft. It's all disobedience to Him. Now, didn't Jesus make this clear in the Sermon on the Mount? When He said, you guys, you pride yourselves in not having committed adultery, but in your heart you've been lusting. It's in the same category. You're still guilty of a moral violation of a sin against God. You pride yourself for not having killed your brother, but you harbor anger towards him. It's still the same moral equivalent. It's still in the same sin bucket. It's all part of the same category, disobedience against God. How did the brothers wind up doing this? Because they're operating under this premise. Hey, or relative to sin, there's a ranking, there's a grading. So long as I'm on the lower end of the scale, yeah, that's not great, but it's okay, and I can live with that. Let me see if I can paint the picture for you this way. I guess it was probably in my first year of ministry. I was serving my first year as a pastor, and I wound up being part of this pastoral leadership training group that met once a month. And we actually met over in Winston, and one of the guys that helped work with us kind of functioned as a consultant, and he would, for each of the pastors in that group, he would come to our church at some point during the year. He'd spend some time with us, walking through our buildings, asking us questions, make suggestions and recommendations, that type of thing. So he came to see me in Charlotte, and we spend some time talking. He asked questions, we walk around, and we continue to talk, and it's approaching lunchtime, and he says to me, hey, how about I take you to lunch? I said, yeah, that'll be great. We then head to a local restaurant. We sit down at a table. The waitress brings us our menus, and we're looking at the menus. And I remember him saying, I'm trying to do better in terms of what I eat. I think I'm going to get a salad. I mean, he's a pretty big guy. I'd say the business end of 300 pounds. And he's just said, hey, I'm trying to do better. I think I'll get a salad. And this was a restaurant I knew that had a good salad bar, so I decided, you know what, I think I'll do the same thing. We both then head up to the salad bar, but I pay attention to what it is that he puts on his plate. Let me just say, it wasn't just lettuce and carrots. He started with that, and then he starts piling on the bacon, loaded in fat. Those little hunks of hard-boiled egg. I don't know how many dozens of eggs he scattered on that salad. Oh, there's some ham. Let me put some of that on there. Oh, there's all these mixed nuts. They're loaded in fat. Let me put them on there. And then he finally gets to the salad dressing, and he puts what appears to be about a quart of Thousand Island dressing on this salad. And salad dressing absolutely loaded in fat. And I remember when we sit down to eat, he says, I was really thinking about getting the hamburger and fries, but I decided I'd do better by getting the salad. And I'm thinking to myself, you could have ordered the hamburger and fries and covered it in gravy and would have come out probably better than that salad. Both of those are full of fat. You're just getting it in a different vehicle. You're getting the same thing, you're just getting it in a different vehicle. On a spiritual level, we often operate, I think, with the same misguided thought. We tell ourselves, well, this isn't good, but it's so much better than that. When in truth, it's all sin, just in a different vehicle. And when push comes to shove, God views every act of disobedience as what? As sin. God views it all in the same category. God doesn't make distinctions relative to sin. Do you remember when God, through Paul, says that the wages of sin is death? Did he make any distinctions saying this is, but that isn't? The wages of sin, period, is death. He made no distinctions. When Jesus said to the woman at the well, go and sin no more, did he say, yeah, watch it on these really bad things, but on these, show some moderation? No, he said, go and sin no more. He made no distinctions. When God said, do not let sin reign in your mortal bodies, he made no distinctions. When he said, do not present your bodies as instruments to sin, he made no distinctions. When God said, be angry and do not sin, he made no distinctions. Here is our question. If God doesn't make distinctions relative to sin, why in the world do we? He views all of it as an act of disobedience to him. It's all in the same category, but you and I consistently will find ourselves making choices, committing acts, and engaging in behaviors after which we're going to be living with colossal regret, asking ourselves, why did I do that? And we'll wind up doing that when we play this game, saying, okay, well, this is really bad. This is much lower on the level, so I'll just do this. Joseph's brothers are getting ready to do something absolutely terrible. They're going to betray their own brother. They're going to sell their brother as a slave for 20 pieces of silver. It'd take a little while, but as the years pass and as this series unfolds, we're going to see them regret that. They're going to be thinking and asking themselves, why in the world did we do that? Because they relished isolation, because they didn't understand the danger of groups, and because they played a game ranking sin. Here's my question. You've got two options. You can just figure all of this out on your own, or you can pay attention to what God has provided for us. These brothers are going to experience enormous, colossal regret. I'd rather learn from them and say, better you than me. I'm going to do different. When push comes to shove, each of us, I am and you are, is posed with this question. Will I decide today, am I in my life going to do different? Am I going to prevent those, I can't believe I did that moment? Won't you bow your heads with me? There are in each of our lives, I'm sure, a slew of things that we can think back on in our lives thus far where we feel an awful lot of regret. When I talk about things where we say, I can't believe I did that, there's probably not simply one, but maybe a slew of things that come to mind. Whether it's good or bad or indifferent, the reality is we can't change that. You and I cannot undo the past. But we can make decisions today, and you can make decisions today that affect your future. You can pay attention to the example of Joseph. You can learn from the mistakes of his brothers. The price that they wind up paying doesn't have to be a price that you pay, but the question is, what are you going to do? Some of you recognize there's some things that have been going on in your life that need to change. And there's people that God has put in your life as warning, caution signs, and you've been running from them instead of running with them. For others, maybe it is that you recognize, perhaps it's at school, maybe it's the crowd that you spend lunch with at work. This is a group that's not headed in a great direction. Doing things, saying things, having a worldview that you know is not helpful to you as a follower of Christ. God's telling you some things need to change. You need to erect some boundaries. Maybe it's that you need to get part of a different group. Maybe God's helping you to see the real danger, the peril that you've been exposing yourself to. Maybe it is that He's been showing you that you've been playing a game. Yeah, this one thing, that's really bad, and I can pat myself on the back, I'm not doing that. But in truth, you're still violating God's laws, still actively engaged in disobeying Him. But you've been able to sleep at night because you told yourself, hey, this is really bad, this one thing, this other thing that I'm doing, it's not nearly so bad. But God's convicting you That the power of His Spirit, He's showing you this and that needs to change because it's all sin in my eyes. Maybe God's leading you to just come and talk to Him and say, Lord, I don't want to make these same mistakes. I want to learn from these men instead of patterning my life after them. If that's the case, in a moment we're going to have a time of decision where you can make that choice and you can just come and talk to God and say, hey, this is where I am and this is where I want to be, where I believe You're guiding me to be. Maybe you say, well, Michael, that's not kind of where I am this morning. Where I am is this whole idea of having a personal relationship with God. We've been singing consistently this morning about power in the name of Jesus and how He can transform a person's life. And you would say, you know what, Michael, I don't know that I've experienced that. I'd like to figure out how I can experience it. If that's the case, this is your time. This is your moment. As we stand to sing in just a moment, will you leave where you are and come and share that with me and let me share with you how you can come to know Him personally? Maybe there's something else you just need to talk to God about that He's burdening your heart about. This is your chance. This is your opportunity. Maybe it's to become a part of this church family. This is your chance. This is your opportunity. God, thank You for giving us the truth of Your word. And truth sometimes encourages us. It lets us know, yeah, we're doing the right thing. Other times it doesn't make us feel so good because it convicts us and it shows us where we have drifted, where we've sauntered away from Your standards. God, as You've spoken to us truth from Your word, You're calling us to do specific things. And only You and those that I'm speaking to know exactly what that is. I pray, Lord, that we use this opportunity as good stewards and follow You in whatever decision You guide us to make. We ask Your blessings on this time in Jesus' name. Amen. I want to ask if you would to stand as Tom and our praise team lead us. As God has spoken to you, you respond this morning.